This lecture is on Chapter 14, which is about social behavior. A few definitions let's look at first. Social facilitation, which is the presence of others, improves our performance. It's that idea that when others are around us, our performance improves. For example, if I'm running a marathon, I might run even faster knowing that others are watching from the sidelines. And I think we've all probably had that experience. Social loafing is the opposite of social facilitation, which means the presence of others causes one to relax one's standards and slack off. The textbook example is singing in a choir versus singing a solo. This time other people are around us, but we may kind of slack off and not really do as well as if we were by ourselves. So I'm sure we've probably all experienced that also. So why do we conform? Why do we allow others being around us or others at all affect our behavior? Let's define conformity. This occurs when people adjust their behavior to what others are doing or adhere to cultural norms. Social norms are rules imposed by one's culture regarding acceptable behavior. For example, it's not acceptable for me to start screaming in a public place. So that's just a social cultural norm that's not acceptable behavior. And there are rules that we may not even realize that we're conforming to. Informational social influence is the idea that we conform to others because we consider them to be a source of knowledge. For example, we might often conform to a teacher, a religious figure, supervisor, because we consider them to be perhaps more knowledgeable than we are. There's normative social influences, which is the idea that we conform to others simply so we can fit in. An example, I might start smoking because all of my friends are smoking, so I want to fit in. I'm giving into that peer pressure. Groupthink is an extreme example in which the person gives up logic and their critical thinking ability in order to be a part of the group. So this goes beyond me just matching the behavior of smoking with my friends to me totally giving up my critical thinking skills and logic and doing whatever the group is doing. Obedience is specifically when a person yields to an authority figure. Minority social influence occurs when the minority members of a group are able to sway the majority by presenting a consistent and unwavering message. The textbook uses the example of a jury. One member of a jury, which would be the minority, with a logical argument actually may be able to change the opinion of the whole group. And I think we all know that it's pretty kind of rare that the minority is able to influence a whole majority. But sometimes it does happen if they have a really logical argument. So, what is social perception? Attribution, to define that, is simply asking the question, why do people do what they do? Well, there's a self-serving bias. In other words, I attribute things that I do well to myself and things I don't do well to others. An example. If I do well by passing the test, it's simply because I studied so hard. But if I failed the test, it's not my fault. It's because I have a poor teacher. So if we do well, we tend to congratulate ourselves, and if we fail, we tend to rather focus on that was someone else's fault. The fundamental attribution error. We tend to attribute others' behavior to their own characteristics. He failed the test because he didn't study. It has nothing to do with the quality of teaching. So again, if we fail it, it's because you have a poor teacher. But if he fails it, it's because he didn't study. It's his own personal quality. And we tend to do that, whether we're conscious of it or not. A schema is how we view the social world. Sometimes we see stereotypes. In other words, we judge how people will behave based solely on what they look like or what group they're a part of. An example would be the thought that all blondes are dumb. Just because someone has blonde hair, we stereotype that they might be dumb. There's an in-group, out-group bias. In other words, we show positive feelings toward those that are in our group and negative feelings toward those outside our group. An example would be outgroup homogeneity. We tend to view all members of an outgroup as the same. I kind of think this as being in high school where you're in the in crowd or the out crowd. We tend to be very positive about people in our in crowd, but we feel negatively about people that are outside our crowd. Speaking of stereotypes, let's also look at prejudice and discrimination, which is related. Prejudice is a biased attitude toward a group or an individual member of a group based on unfair generalizations about what members of that group are like. An example of that, a huge one, is racism. There's also sexism, where we assume certain things about certain genders, and ageism, where we assume certain things about people who are older or people who are younger. Discrimination is the preferential treatment of certain people. In other words, it's not just our thoughts, but it's our actual behavior. And we know our behavior is often based on our thoughts, which is prejudice. So let's look at attitudes and behavior. Attitude is our feelings and beliefs toward an object, idea, or person. The quote I included is, "It's not about what happens to you, it's about how you perceive what happens to you." Attitude is everything. And you guys have probably heard that idea before, that again, it's not what happens to you, it's just how you feel about what happens to you. How do you look at it? How do you perceive it? So, how are attitudes changed? How is the way we think and feel changed? Um, Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable feeling created by receiving information that is different from our views as a person. So when someone tells us something that is different from how we view the situation, that's uncomfortable. We don't like that. We don't like to feel uncomfortable. So how do we get rid of this discomfort? Well, we change our behavior to make it correlate with the new information we've received. So in other words, I take their information and I begin to believe it, because that gets rid of the discomfort. We might justify our behavior by changing the information received to better fit with our behavior. Or we might gather more information that does support our views and reinforces our behavior. Persuasion is the act of attempting to change the opinions, beliefs, or choices of others by explanation or argument. Persuasion is sometimes effective, sometimes not. It depends on the source of the information. Are they knowledgeable? Do you respect that person? It depends on the methods of persuasion. And it also depends on the targeted audience. Are they open to change? Are they open to being persuaded, or are they not? Let's look at social relations, which are obviously the relationship between people. Specifically, let's look at aggression, helping, and attraction. We probably all know what aggression is, but as a definition, it is violent behavior that is intended to cause psychological or physical harm, or both, to another being. Some people are more prone to violence than others, likely due to the combined influences of genetics, experience, and various biological factors. Pro-social behavior, or helping, is an action that is beneficial to others. It's the opposite of aggression. So why do people help? Well, altruism, which is the selfless concern for and giving aid to others. The idea of kin selection is that we help those that we're related to in order to further the gene pool. Here comes this evolutionary idea again, that we want to reproduce and further a gene pool. The idea of reciprocal altruism is that if I help you now, you will help me in the future. Also, we help people because of empathy. Empathy is the ability to share the feelings of others and understand their situation. In other words, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And the empathy altruism hypothesis indicates that we will only help others if we're able to empathize with them. We'll only help others if we're able to put ourselves in their shoes and feel the way they're feeling. Attraction. So what creates attraction? Familiarity. The more we are exposed to an object, idea, or person, the more attractive it becomes. So the more familiar with it, the more attractive it becomes. And people with similar ideas, values, and interests have a greater tendency to like one another. So what creates love? Let's look at the little triangle here, fatuous love is considered passion and commitment. So, and to have a good relationship, you have to have all three. You have to have passion, commitment, and intimacy. And you can look and see that it explains if you only have one or two. For example, if you have only commitment but no intimacy or passion, that's considered empty love. If you have only passion but not intimacy or commitment, that's considered just infatuation, kind of just a physical thing. And then you can see it also gives examples of when you might have two but not the third. But we know that all three are required to have love, to have an intimate relationship. That's all I have for you about social relations, but if you have any questions, please let me know.